Hashtag the hunt begins. Marcus Kane pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the abandoned mining station, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but his enhanced hearing picked up the subtle vibrations that meant death was approaching. 3 clicks from the left corridor, followed by the almost inaudible hiss of pressurized air being released. The Kethvari were here. Earth had been gone for 6 months now. Not destroyed in some grand battle or consumed by a stellar phenomenon, but systematically exterminated by the Galactic Assassination Guild. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship had been marked for termination. The contract had been placed by the Zephyrian Empire, who viewed humanity's rapid expansion as a threat to their millennial dominance. What the Zephyrians hadn't expected was that some humans would refuse to die quietly. Marcus checked his weapon's power cell. 43% remaining. Not enough for a prolonged firefight, but sufficient if he was smart about it. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was using Kethvari technology against them. The plasma rifle had been stripped from the corpse of an assassin who'd underestimated a primitive human 3 weeks ago on Kepler Station. That mistake had cost the alien his life and given Marcus his first real weapon in this impossible war. The mining station orbited a dead world in the Tau Ceti system. Once, it had processed rare elements for the colonial fleet. Now it served as a tomb for the 17 humans who'd tried to hide here. Marcus had arrived too late to save them, but just in time to set a trap for their killers. The Kethvari always returned to verify their kills, a professional habit that Marcus intended to exploit. Footsteps echoed through the station's main corridor. Heavy, deliberate, confident. The Kethvari didn't know he was here. Their thermal scanners would show only the cooling corpses of their previous victims. Marcus had learned to mask his heat signature using the station's environmental systems, a trick that had kept him alive longer than any other surviving human. The first assassin rounded the corner, its serpentine body moving with predatory grace. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, the Kethvari resembled a cross between a cobra and a mantis, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws and a hood that could expand to reveal sensor arrays. Their skin shifted color to match their surroundings, making them nearly invisible in most environments. Nearly, but not completely. Marcus had spent weeks studying their movement patterns, their hunting techniques, their weaknesses. The Kethvari were apex predators on their homeworld, but they'd evolve in forests and swamps. The metallic corridors of human stations created acoustic shadows they weren't accustomed to navigating. More importantly, their color-changing abilities relied on light spectrum analysis. In the strobing emergency lighting of the abandoned station, they were vulnerable. The alien paused at the entrance to the processing bay where the 17 bodies lay. Its hood expanded, sensors sweeping the area for any signs of life. Marcus held his breath, every muscle in his body coiled for action. The assassin's comrade would be approaching from the opposite corridor in approximately 30 seconds. He had to time this perfectly. 28 seconds. The first Kethvari began moving among the corpses, examining each one with professional detachment. Its claws extended, taking tissue samples for DNA verification. The Assassination Guild was thorough in their work. 15 seconds. Marcus could hear the second assassin's approach, still moving with the confidence of a predator that had never truly been prey. 10 seconds. The first Kethvari reached the center of the processing bay, exactly where Marcus needed it to be. 5 seconds. Marcus's finger found the detonator he'd rigged to the station's mining charges. The explosive yield wouldn't be enough to breach the hull, but it would create a localized electromagnetic pulse that would disable the alien's adaptive camouflage. 0. The explosion lit up the processing bay like a miniature star. The Kethvari shrieked as its camouflage systems overloaded, leaving it visible and disoriented. Marcus rolled from his hiding place behind a support beam, the plasma rifle already charging as he moved. The first shot took the alien in what passed for its center mass, the superheated plasma burning through its natural armor like paper. The second assassin burst into the bay, hood fully extended and claws gleaming. It spotted Marcus immediately, but the human was already moving. Years of military training combined with 6 months of desperate survival had transformed Marcus into something the galaxy had never seen before. He wasn't just a human anymore. He was evolution accelerated by necessity. The Kethvari lunged with lightning speed, claws aimed at Marcus's throat. But Marcus had anticipated the attack pattern. He dropped low and rolled left, the plasma rifle spitting energy as he moved. The shot caught the alien in its lower right arm, severing the limb in a spray of fluorescent blood. The creature's shriek echoed through the station as it crashed into a control console. Marcus didn't give it time to recover. He was on his feet and moving before the alien hit the ground. The second shot took the Kethvari in the head, ending its life instantly. Two of the galaxy's most feared assassins dead in less than 30 seconds. The guild would be interested to learn about this development. As the smoke cleared, Marcus moved to examine the bodies. Each Kethvari carried a neural interface that connected them to the guild's network. Marcus had learned to access these devices, downloading mission parameters and target lists. What he found in these interfaces made his blood run cold. The contracts weren't just for the remaining human survivors scattered across the galaxy. There were new listings, updated hourly, as more aliens paid to have humans eliminated. The Zephyrians had started something they couldn't control. Fear of humanity was spreading, and where fear went, assassination contracts followed. Marcus downloaded the data and prepared to leave the station. The neural interfaces also contained the locations of other guild cells, their next targets, their movement patterns. Information that could be used against them. The hunters were about to become the hunted, but they didn't know it yet. As he made his way to the docking bay where his stolen ship waited, Marcus thought about the 17 humans who died here. They'd been colonists, families trying to build new lives on distant worlds. None of them had been soldiers. None of them had deserved what happened to them. But their deaths had served a purpose, even if they'd never know it. They'd drawn the assassins into a trap, and that trap had given Marcus the intelligence he needed to strike back. The ship was a modified courier vessel, originally Terran design, but upgraded with alien technology Marcus had scavenged from his kills. The hull bore scorch marks from a dozen firefights, and the life support systems ran on borrowed time, but it was fast, and it was quiet. Most importantly, it was invisible to guild scanning protocols. Marcus strapped himself into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence. According to the intelligence he'd just gathered, there was a guild base in the Proxima system, hidden in an asteroid field. 12 assassins were stationed there, coordinating hunts across 3 sectors. It would be heavily defended, probably considered impregnable by guild standards. Perfect. As the ship cleared the station's docking bay and engaged its stealth systems, Marcus allowed himself a rare smile. The Kethvari had taught him something valuable in their final moments. They'd shown him fear. For the first time since arriving at the station, the assassins had experienced genuine terror. They'd realized they were facing something they didn't understand, something their training hadn't prepared them for. The galaxy thought it knew humans. They'd seen the colonies, the trading posts, the diplomatic missions. They'd cataloged human strengths and weaknesses, filed reports on human psychology and tactics. But they'd made a critical error in their assessment. They'd studied civilized humans, peaceful humans, humans constrained by law and morality and social expectation. They'd never met a human with nothing left to lose. Marcus set course for the Proxima system and engaged the autopilot. The journey would take 18 hours, giving him time to plan his assault on the guild base. He pulled up the station schematics he'd downloaded and began memorizing every corridor, every defensive position, every possible escape route. The Kethvari had been skilled killers, but they'd operated with the confidence of apex predators. The guild base would be different. It would be a fortress, defended by creatures who specialized in death. But Marcus had learned something important during his months of running and hiding and fighting. The galaxy's assassins were used to hunting prey. They understood pursuit and elimination, patience and precision. What they didn't understand was being systematically stalked by something that thought like they did, but fought like nothing they'd ever encountered. As the ship hurtled through the void between stars, Marcus began to prepare his equipment. Each weapon was cleaned and tested, each piece of stolen alien technology calibrated for maximum effectiveness. He'd become a collector of sorts, gathering tools and knowledge from every assassin he'd killed. Zephyrian energy shields, Kethvari camouflage systems, and Dorian neural disruptors. Each piece of technology taught him more about his enemies, revealed new vulnerabilities to exploit. The ship's computer chimed softly, indicating they'd reached the halfway point of their journey. Marcus stood and moved to the small galley, preparing a meal from his dwindling supplies. The irony of eating HFY ration packs wasn't lost on him. He'd learned to appreciate alien cuisine during his travels, though not always by choice. As he ate, Marcus reviewed the personnel files he'd stolen from the guild database. Each assassin had a specialty, a preferred method of killing. Some relied on stealth and poison, others on overwhelming firepower. The base commander was a Vorthak named Zelnoth, a creature that resembled a cross between a spider and a shark. Vorthak were pack hunters in their natural environment, but Zelnoth had been cast out from his clan for excessive brutality. Even by assassin standards, he was considered unstable. Perfect. Unstable meant predictable. Unstable meant he could be manipulated. Marcus finished his meal and returned to the cockpit. The stars had shifted slightly during his absence, a reminder of the vast distances he was crossing in his one-man war against the guild. Sometimes he wondered if he was the last human in the galaxy, if all the other survivors had finally been hunted down. The thought didn't depress him as much as it should have. If he was alone, then he was free to fight without worrying about collateral damage. The ship's sensors detected the Proxima System's outer marker buoys, ancient navigation aids left by the first explorers. Marcus began his approach, the stealth systems humming quietly as they bent light, and sensor beams around the ship's hull. The asteroid field appeared on his screens as a chaotic jumble of rock and ice, perfect camouflage for a hidden base. But Marcus had learned to read the signs. Asteroids didn't naturally form geometric patterns, and they certainly didn't emit the faint electromagnetic signatures that indicated hidden installations. The guild base was there, buried deep inside what appeared to be a particularly large asteroid. Defensive platforms disguised as space debris orbited the installation, their weapons systems powered down, but ready to activate at the first sign of trouble. Marcus smiled as he studied the tactical display. The guild had made their fortress impregnable to conventional assault, but they planned for attacks by fleets and armies. They hadn't considered the possibility of a single infiltrator who understood their methods better than they understood his. The ship drifted closer to the asteroid field, powered down to minimal life support to avoid detection. Marcus donned his environmental suit and prepared for the most dangerous part of his journey. He would have to leave the ship and cross 2 kilometers of open space to reach the asteroid base, all while avoiding the automated defense systems that surrounded it. As he sealed his helmet and checked his equipment one final time, Marcus thought about Earth. Not the planet that had been destroyed, but the idea of Earth. The concept of home, a belonging somewhere in the vast darkness of space. The assassins had taken that from him, from all of humanity. But they'd also given him something in return, though they'd never intended to. They'd given him purpose. Marcus opened the ship's airlock and stepped into the void, beginning his silent approach to the guild base. In 18 hours, 12 of the galaxy's most feared killers would discover what happened when humans stopped being civilized. Hashtag the fortress falls the asteroid surface was a maze of camouflaged entry points and hidden sensor arrays. Marcus drifted through the void, using microthrusters to adjust his trajectory as he approached what appeared to be a natural crater, but was actually the base's primary docking bay. The guild's architects had done excellent work concealing their installation, but they'd followed predictable patterns that Marcus had learned to recognize during his months of hunting their kind. Every guild facility followed the same basic design philosophy: multiple redundant entry points, overlapping fields of fire, and a central command structure that could be sealed off in case of breach. The problem with following doctrine so rigidly was that it made their facilities readable to anyone who understood their methodology. Marcus had become very good at reading guild installations. He touched down silently on the asteroid's surface, mag boots engaging to anchor him in place. The environmental suit's heads-up display showed him the location of every sensor he could detect, painting paths through the maze of surveillance equipment. Most beings would find the security grid impenetrable. Marcus found it educational. The first lesson the grid taught him was that the guild expected threats to come from ships and armies. The sensors were calibrated to detect engine signatures and weapons systems, not individual life forms in environmental suits. The second lesson was that the defensive systems were designed to repel attack, not prevent infiltration. There was a difference, and that difference was about to cost the guild dearly. Marcus made his way to an auxiliary airlock hidden beneath what appeared to be a natural rock formation. The access codes he'd stolen from the Kethvari neural interfaces were still valid, confirming his suspicion that guild security protocols relied too heavily on the assumption that their operatives were unbeatable. The airlock cycled through its sequence, and Marcus found himself in a service corridor deep within the asteroid base. The corridor was designed for maintenance drones, not organic beings. Marcus had to crawl through sections that were barely wide enough for his suit, but the cramped conditions worked in his favor. The guild's internal sensors weren't monitoring areas that weren't supposed to contain life forms. He was invisible as long as he stayed in the maintenance tunnels. Marcus pulled up the facility schematics he'd memorized during the journey. The command center was 3 levels up and 2 sectors over, protected by blast doors and automated defenses. Between him and his target were 12 of the galaxy's most dangerous killers, all of whom thought they were safe in their impregnable fortress. They were about to learn otherwise. Marcus began his infiltration by targeting the base's life support systems, not to disable them, but to modify them. The atmosphere processors that recycled air throughout the facility also distributed trace chemicals that helped different alien species coexist in the same environment. Marcus introduced a few modifications of his own, compounds he'd synthesized from materials in the Kethvari's own equipment. The first compound was a neural inhibitor designed specifically for Vorthack physiology. It wouldn't kill Zelnoth, but it would slow his reaction time and cloud his judgment. The second was a pheromone disruptor that would interfere with the scent-based communication systems used by several guild species. The third was his own creation, a modified human endorphin that would trigger aggression responses in most predatory aliens. By the time Marcus finished his work on the life support systems, the base's inhabitants were already beginning to feel the effects. He could hear raised voices echoing through the corridors, confusion and anger spreading through the facility as the chemicals took hold. The guild operatives were turning on each other, suspecting betrayal and sabotage from within their own ranks. Perfect. Marcus made his way to the armory, moving through maintenance shafts and service corridors with practiced ease. The guild's weapons cache was impressive, containing enough firepower to level a small city. Energy weapons, explosives, chemical agents, and devices whose purpose Marcus could only guess at. All of it heavily secured, of course, but the guild had made the same mistake as every other military organization in the galaxy. They'd secured their weapons against external threats, not against someone who was already inside their perimeter. Marcus helped himself to several items that caught his interest. A Zephyrian plasma cannon that could punch through heavy armor, a set of Andorian stealth mines that would be invisible until activated, and a neural scrambler that could turn an enemy's own nervous system against them. He also took several charges of military-grade explosives, enough to turn the asteroid base into a debris field if necessary. As he loaded the stolen equipment into a maintenance cart, Marcus heard the first sounds of actual violence from the upper levels. His chemical additions to the life support system were working better than expected. The guild operatives were actively fighting each other now, their natural paranoia amplified by the compounds flooding their systems. By the time they realized they were under attack, it would be too late to mount an effective defense. Marcus took a lift to the upper levels, disguising himself as a maintenance worker by wearing a stolen uniform and keeping his head down. The base's internal monitoring systems were focused on the growing chaos in the residential sections, not on routine maintenance activities. He passed 3 guild operatives in the corridors, but none of them paid attention to what appeared to be a worker going about his duties. The command center was located at the heart of the facility, surrounded by layers of security that would have challenged an army. But Marcus wasn't an army. He was something worse, a human who had learned to think like his enemies while retaining all the unpredictability that made his species so dangerous. The guild's security measures were designed to stop conventional attacks, not the methodical dismantling of their entire infrastructure. Marcus began by targeting the communication systems. The guild base served as a coordination hub for assassination missions across 3 sectors, which meant it maintained constant contact with operatives in the field. By introducing subtle corruptions into the data streams, Marcus could turn the base into a weapon against its own network. false orders, altered mission parameters, corrupted target lists, all designed to create chaos throughout the guild's operations. Next, he focused on the base's internal defense grid. The automated weapons systems that protected critical areas were slave to a central AI that monitored threat levels and response protocols. Marcus had studied guild AI architecture during his previous encounters, learning their programming languages and operational parameters. It took him less than an hour to convince the defense grid that the base was under attack by guild operatives who had gone rogue. The sounds of battle intensified as automated turrets began firing on the facility's own inhabitants. Marcus smiled grimly as he heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons echoing through the corridors. The guild operatives were trapped between their own defenses and their chemically induced paranoia, fighting a war on multiple fronts without understanding what was happening to them. Commander Zelnatha's voice boomed over the base's communication system, trying to restore order among his troops. But the neural inhibitor was affecting his speech patterns, making him sound confused and uncertain. His commands contradicted each other, adding to the chaos rather than resolving it. The Vorthack's pack-hunting instincts were working against him as the compounds in his system convinced him that his own operatives had turned against him. Marcus made his way to the command center's outer perimeter, where he encountered his first real resistance. A pair of Kethvari assassins had taken defensive positions behind a barricade of overturned furniture, their adaptive camouflage making them nearly invisible against the metallic walls. They were professionals, unlike the panicking operatives elsewhere in the base, and they recognized that something was systematically destroying their facility. The first assassin died before it realized Marcus was there. The neural scrambler turned its own nervous system against it, causing violent convulsions that ended when its heart stopped beating. The second assassin managed to get off a single shot before Marcus put it down with the plasma cannon, the superheated energy burning through its natural armor and the wall behind it. Marcus stepped over the bodies and approached the command center's blast doors. The security system demanded authorization codes that he didn't have, but he didn't need them. The explosives he'd stolen from the armory were more than sufficient to breach the reinforced barriers. The detonation shook the entire base, sending tremors through the asteroid structure and triggering emergency lighting throughout the facility. Beyond the ruined blast doors, Marcus found the command center in chaos. Control stations sparked with electrical fires, holographic displays flickered with corrupted data, and the facility's AI struggled to process the contradictory inputs Marcus had fed into its systems. At the center of it all stood Commander Zelnath, his spider-like form hunched over a communication console as he tried to contact Guild headquarters. The Vorthack looked up as Marcus entered, his multiple eyes focusing on the human with predatory intensity. Zelnath was larger than his species average, standing nearly 10 feet tall with legs that could move faster than most beings could track. His mandibles clicked together as he processed what he was seeing, the neural inhibitor slowing his thoughts just enough to create fatal hesitation. Impossible, Zelnath hissed, his voice distorted by the chemicals affecting his speech centers. Humans are extinct. The contracts were completed. All of them. Marcus raised the plasma cannon, its charging coils glowing with barely contained energy. You missed one. The Vorthack lunged with surprising speed, despite the neural inhibitor's effects. His legs carried him across the command center in a blur of motion, mandibles spread wide to reveal rows of serrated teeth. But Marcus had been expecting the attack. He'd studied Vorthack hunting patterns during his journey to the base, learning their preferred attack vectors and movement speeds. Marcus rolled left as Zelnath's claws swept through the space where he'd been standing. The plasma cannon fired as he moved, the energy blast catching the Vorthack in his center mass and burning through his natural armor. Zelnath shrieked in pain and rage, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. His species was remarkably resilient, evolved to survive injuries that would kill most other beings. The Vorthack spun around for a second attack, but Marcus was already moving. He dropped the plasma cannon and drew a pair of energy blades he'd taken from dead Kethvari, the weapons humming as they sliced through the air. Zelnath's legs were his primary weapons, but they were also his weakness. If Marcus could cripple his mobility, the commander would be helpless. The energy blades found their targets, severing two of Zelnotha's legs in sprays of fluorescent blood. The Vort hack crashed to the floor, his remaining limbs unable to support his weight. Marcus stepped back as the creature thrashed wildly, avoiding the desperate swipes of his claws while waiting for the blood loss to weaken him further. "Who are you?" Zelnoth gasped, his voice growing weaker as his life ebbed away. "What are you?" Marcus looked down at the dying commander, remembering the 17 colonists who'd been murdered on the mining station. "I'm the last human in the galaxy," he said quietly, "and I'm going to kill every last one of you." Zelnotha's eyes went wide with something that might have been fear or understanding. Then, the light faded from them, and the guild commander was dead. Marcus moved to the command center's main control station, accessing the base's central computer with the authorization codes he'd extracted from Zelnotha's neural interface. The data stored in the facility's memory banks was a treasure trove of intelligence. Complete guild membership lists, operational procedures, hidden base locations, and, most importantly, the identities of every being who had placed assassination contracts on human targets. As Marcus downloaded the data to a portable storage device, explosions echoed through the facility. The surviving guild operatives were either dead or had fled the base entirely, leaving their installation defenseless. The automated systems that were supposed to protect the facility had turned it into a death trap, and the chemical agents Marcus had introduced into the life support system had driven the survivors insane with paranoia and rage. Marcus made his way back to the docking bay, moving through corridors filled with the bodies of guild operatives who had killed each other in their chemically induced frenzy. 12 of the galaxy's most feared assassins, dead without Marcus having to face most of them directly. It was a lesson in the power of understanding your enemy's psychology and using it against them. The stolen shuttle was where he'd left it, hidden among the base's maintenance craft. Marcus transferred his equipment and the intelligence data to the ship's storage compartments, then began the launch sequence. As the shuttle cleared the asteroid's docking bay, he activated the remote detonators he'd placed throughout the facility. The explosion was spectacular, visible for millions of kilometers as the guild base was consumed by its own weapons and power systems. The asteroid split apart in a cascade of fire and debris, taking with it one of the guild's most important operational centers. But, more importantly, it sent a message to every assassin in the galaxy. Humanity was fighting back. As Marcus set course for his next target, he reviewed the intelligence he'd stolen from the base's computers. The guild had been operating under the assumption that they were hunting scattered refugees, the last survivors of a dead species. They had no idea that one of those survivors had declared war on their entire organization. The data revealed locations of 17 other guild facilities scattered across the galaxy. Safe houses, training centers, coordination hubs, all of them thinking they were secure from retaliation. Marcus began plotting approach vectors and assault plans, his mind already working through the tactical challenges each target would present. But there was something else in the data that caught his attention. References to a meeting, a gathering of guild leadership that was scheduled to take place in 3 weeks. The Conclave of Shadows, they called it, where the organization's most powerful figures would discuss the future of their operations. 237 beings would attend, representing every major assassination syndicate in the galaxy. Marcus smiled as he studied the meeting details. The guild thought they were gathering to celebrate the successful elimination of humanity. Instead, they would be assembling the perfect target for a human who had learned to think like them while retaining everything that made his species dangerous. The shuttle's navigation computer chimed as it calculated the course to his next destination. Marcus leaned back in the pilot's seat and closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. The guild had made a critical error when they decided to exterminate humanity. They turned a peaceful species into a weapon specifically designed to destroy them. And that weapon was just getting started. #network of death. Marcus Kane stood in the observation deck of the stolen guild cruiser, watching as the ringed planet of Kepler 442c grew larger in the forward viewport. Somewhere in those rings was the guild's most secretive training facility, where they created the next generation of galactic assassins. According to the intelligence he'd taken from Zelnotha's base, 57 of the galaxy's most promising killers were currently undergoing advanced combat training in a facility hidden within the planet's ring system. 3 weeks had passed since the destruction of the Proxima base. In that time, Marcus had hit 6 more guild installations, leaving behind nothing but debris and the growing legend of the Shadow Walker, who was systematically dismantling their organization. Each attack had been different, showcasing new tactics and capabilities that kept the guild's leadership guessing about what they were facing. The cruiser he now commanded had been taken during his assault on a guild supply depot in the Vega system. The facility had been lightly defended, staffed primarily by logistics personnel who weren't equipped to deal with a human who fought like a force of nature. Marcus had needed a larger ship for what was coming next, and the guild had thoughtfully provided him with one of their finest vessels. He'd modified the cruiser extensively, integrating technology stolen from a dozen different guild installations. The ship's hull now bore active camouflage systems that could mimic any vessel in the guild database. Its weapons had been upgraded with plasma cannons and neural disruptors. Most importantly, its computer systems had been reprogrammed to think like Marcus rather than like the guild operatives who'd originally crewed it. The training facility appeared on his sensors as he approached the ring system, a massive construct built inside a hollowed-out asteroid that had been captured and positioned among the planet's natural satellites. It was a work of engineering genius, completely invisible to conventional scanning methods, and protected by defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets. But Marcus wasn't planning a conventional assault. He activated the cruiser's guild identification systems and requested permission to dock. According to the facility's records, his ship was the Crimson Talon, returning from a successful mission in the Outer Rim. The ship's AI, now reprogrammed to serve human interests, perfectly mimicked the communication protocols of the vessel's original crew. Crimson Talon, you are cleared for approach Vector 7, came the response from the training facility's control center. Proceed to Docking Bay 12 and prepare for standard inspection procedures. Marcus smiled as he guided the ship toward its assigned docking bay. The guild's security protocols were designed to prevent external attacks, not infiltration by their own vessels. In their arrogance, they'd assumed that no one could successfully impersonate their operatives well enough to gain access to their most secure facilities. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The docking bay was massive, designed to accommodate the largest ships in the guild fleet. Marcus counted 17 other vessels already docked, representing the personal transports of various trainers and administrators. He'd studied the personnel files during his approach, memorizing names and faces and operational specialties. Knowledge was the most valuable weapon in his arsenal. As the Crimson Talon settled into its assigned berth, Marcus made final preparations for his infiltration. He wore the uniform of a guild courier, complete with identification codes and genetic markers that had been extracted from dead operatives. The facility's security systems would read him as exactly what he appeared to be, a routine messenger delivering new training protocols. The airlock cycled, and Marcus stepped into the facility for the first time. The training center was even more impressive from the inside, with multiple levels devoted to different aspects of assassination education. Combat simulators, weapons ranges, psychological conditioning chambers, all designed to transform promising killers into perfect instruments of death. Marcus made his way through the facility's corridors, observing the daily routines of both trainers and students. The trainees were young members of various species, selected for their potential and brought here to learn the guild's methods. They moved with the confidence of beings who'd never encountered a threat they couldn't handle, unaware that death itself was walking among them. The first phase of his plan involved the facility's computer network. Like all guild installations, the training center maintained detailed records of its operations, including psychological profiles of every trainee and instructor. Marcus accessed a maintenance terminal and began introducing corruptions into the facility's data streams, subtle alterations that would turn the guild's own security measures against them. He modified the psychological profiles to indicate that several trainers were showing signs of instability and potential betrayal. He altered training schedules to create conflicts and confusion among different groups. Most importantly, he introduced new emergency protocols that would lock down specific sections of the facility on his command, trapping the inhabitants inside with the base's own security systems. While the facility's computer network processed his alterations, Marcus made his way to the weapons storage areas. The guild maintained an impressive arsenal of experimental weapons, devices that were too dangerous or unpredictable for field use, but perfect for training purposes. Marcus helped himself to several items, including a molecular disruptor that could reduce organic matter to its component atoms and a neural interface that allowed direct control of electronic systems. The training center's daily routine continued around him as he moved through the facility. Students practiced assassination techniques in holographic environments while instructors critiqued their form and methodology. None of them paid attention to the courier who was quietly sabotaging their facility from within. Marcus's next target was the facility's life support systems. He learned during his previous infiltrations that guild installations relied heavily on automated environmental controls, making them vulnerable to subtle manipulation. This time, instead of introducing chemical agents, he modified the atmosphere processors to create localized pressure differentials that would disorient the facility's inhabitants without killing them immediately. He wanted them conscious when he revealed himself. The effects began manifesting after several hours. Trainees and instructors reported headaches and difficulty concentrating. The facility's medical staff attributed the symptoms to stress and fatigue, unaware that their environment was slowly being turned into a weapon against them. Marcus watched from the shadows as confusion spread through the training center. As evening approached by the facility's artificial day-night cycle, Marcus activated the first phase of his assault. The emergency lockdown protocols he'd introduced earlier triggered simultaneously across multiple sections of the training center, sealing blast doors and activating containment measures. Suddenly, the facility's inhabitants found themselves trapped in small groups, isolated from each other, and unable to coordinate their response. Panic spread quickly as the guild operatives realized they were under attack. But they couldn't identify their attacker or determine how their security had been compromised. The facility's internal sensors showed no signs of infiltration, and the computer systems insisted that all personnel were accounted for and authorized. Marcus began his systematic elimination of the facility's inhabitants, starting with the instructors who posed the greatest threat. He moved through the maintenance shafts and service corridors, using the molecular disruptor to eliminate targets without leaving evidence of his presence. To the survivors, it appeared that their colleagues were simply vanishing without explanation. The first instructor to die was a Zephyrian weapons specialist named Carthol, who was trapped alone in an ammunition storage room when the lockdown activated. Marcus dropped through a ventilation shaft and disabled the alien before he could raise an alarm. The molecular disruptor reduced Carthol to a small pile of component atoms, leaving no trace that he'd ever existed. The second victim was a Vorthack combat trainer who'd been drilling a group of students in close-quarters fighting techniques. Marcus used the neural interface to take control of the training room's holographic systems, creating phantom enemies that distracted the instructor long enough for Marcus to strike. The Vorthack died without ever seeing his killer, his body dissolving into nothingness as his students watched in horror. Word spread quickly through the facility's communication systems. The guild operatives began to understand that they were facing something unprecedented, an enemy who could strike anywhere and disappear without leaving evidence. Their training had prepared them for many scenarios, but not for fighting an invisible adversary who understood their tactics better than they did. Marcus continued his hunt methodically, eliminating targets in order of threat level, while using the facility's own systems to monitor the survivors' communications. He learned their hiding places, their fears, their desperate plans for escape or counterattack. Knowledge that he used to stay one step ahead of their increasingly frantic efforts to survive. By midnight, half of the facility's inhabitants were dead or missing. The survivors had barricaded themselves in the main training hall, using automated defenses and improvised weapons to create a defensive perimeter. They'd managed to restore partial communication with guild headquarters, sending desperate pleas for assistance and warning of an unknown threat that was systematically destroying the training center. Marcus accessed the facility's communication systems and listened to their transmissions with interest. The guild leadership was struggling to understand what was happening, their responses revealing confusion and fear that he found deeply satisfying. For the first time since beginning their war against humanity, the assassins were experiencing genuine terror. Time to introduce himself properly. Marcus made his way to the main training hall, using the neural interface to disable the survivors' defensive systems one by one. Automated turrets stopped functioning, blast doors opened at random intervals, and the facility's AI began playing recordings of the screams from the first victims he'd killed. Psychological warfare at its finest. He entered the training hall through the main entrance, no longer bothering with stealth or subtlety. The surviving guild operatives turned to face him, their weapons trained on the human who had single-handedly destroyed their facility. Marcus recognized several faces from the personnel files he'd studied, including the facility commander, a HFY named Cicero, who trained some of the guild's most successful assassins. Impossible, Cicero hissed, her hood expanding as sensors analyzed Marcus from multiple angles. Humans are extinct. We eliminated every colony, every ship, every trace of your species. Marcus walked slowly into the center of the training hall, the molecular disruptor held loosely at his side. 28 guild operatives surrounded him, their weapons powered and ready to fire. Under normal circumstances, he would have been dead before taking a second step. But these weren't normal circumstances. You eliminated the innocent ones, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. The colonists, the families, the children who never hurt anyone. But you made one critical mistake. He raised the molecular disruptor, its charging coils beginning to glow with contained energy. You left me alive. The first shot came from a Zephyrian trainee whose nerves couldn't handle the tension. The energy bolt passed harmlessly through Marcus's position as he activated the personal cloaking device he'd stolen from a HFY instructor. The sudden disappearance of their target caused panic among the survivors, who began firing wildly at shadows and movement that didn't exist. Marcus reappeared behind the Zephyrian who'd fired first, the molecular disruptor reducing the alien to component atoms before he could scream. The human vanished again as return fire filled the space where he'd been standing, energy bolts and projectile rounds destroying holographic training equipment and scorching the walls. "Where is he?" someone shouted in the guild's common tongue. "How was he doing this?" Marcus materialized next to a group of Andorian trainees, the molecular disruptor firing repeatedly as he moved among them like death incarnate. Bodies dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the screams of their companions and the acrid smell of disrupted molecules hanging in the air. "This is for Earth," Marcus said as he appeared behind Commander Assessistral. The HFY spun around, claws extended, and venom sacs preparing to release their deadly cargo. But the molecular disruptor was faster than her reflexes, and she joined her students in atomic dissolution. The remaining survivors broke and ran, abandoning their defensive positions in a desperate attempt to reach the facility's escape pods. Marcus let them go, but not because of mercy. He wanted them to carry word back to guild headquarters about what they'd witnessed. Fear was a weapon, and he intended to use it. Marcus made his way to the facility's control center, where he accessed the computer systems one final time. He downloaded the complete training records and psychological profiles of every guild operative who'd passed through the facility over the past decade. More importantly, he uploaded a message to the guild's communication network, a recording that would be transmitted to every guild facility in the galaxy. "My name is Marcus Kane," he said, looking directly into the recording device. "I'm the last human in the galaxy, and I am coming for all of you. You destroyed my species, murdered innocent colonists, and turned the galaxy against us. Now you will learn what happens when humans stop being civilized." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "I know where your bases are located. I know your operational procedures. I know your weaknesses. And I will use that knowledge to destroy every last one of you." Marcus deleted the facility's navigation records and activated the emergency destruction sequence, then made his way back to the Crimson Talon. As the ship cleared the training facility's docking bay, he watched the installation tear itself apart from the inside, automated systems following the final protocols he'd programmed into their memory banks. 57 of the guild's most promising trainees were dead, along with their instructors and support staff. The facility that had produced some of the galaxy's most dangerous killers was an expanding cloud of debris. More importantly, word of the Shadow Walker, which spread throughout the guild's network, carrying with it the fear that would make his future operations even more effective. Marcus set course for his next target, a guild safe house in the Rigel system where senior operatives were coordinating the hunt for the remaining human survivors. According to his intelligence, they thought they were close to finding the last scattered refugees, unaware that their greatest threat was about to knock on their door. The galaxy's assassins had declared war on humanity. Now humanity was fighting back, and they were about to learn that some wars can't be won by conventional means. Sometimes, the only way to defeat monsters is to become something worse than they are. And Marcus Kane was very good at being something worse. Hashtag the Conclave of Shadows, the neutral space station orbiting the dead system of Zirion Prime, was a marvel of galactic engineering. Built by an extinct species whose name had been lost to time, it served as a meeting place for beings who could never safely gather anywhere else. Pirates, smugglers, information brokers, and assassins used the station as neutral ground, protected by ancient treaties and automated defense systems that could destroy entire fleets. Today, it was hosting the Conclave of Shadows. Marcus Kane drifted in the space suit-clad body of a guild maintenance worker, tethered to the station's outer hull as he installed what appeared to be routine sensor upgrades. The identity belonged to a Regilian named Vexnull who had died during Marcus's assault on the safe house 2 weeks earlier. The guild's bureaucracy moved slowly, and Vexnull's death hadn't been reported to the station's administration yet. Through the suit's helmet display, Marcus watched guild shuttles arriving in steady streams, disgorging the most dangerous beings in the galaxy onto the station's docking bays. 237 assassins, crime lords, and syndicate leaders were gathering to discuss the future of their organizations. They thought they were here to celebrate the successful extermination of humanity. Instead, they were assembling for their own funeral. Marcus had spent the past month preparing for this moment. The intelligence gathered from destroyed guild facilities had revealed the Conclave's location and timing, but infiltrating the gathering would be the most dangerous operation he'd ever attempted. The station was protected by security measures that could challenge an army, and every being aboard was a professional killer capable of ending his life in seconds. But Marcus had advantages they couldn't anticipate. He understood their methods, their psychology, their weaknesses. More importantly, he learned to think like them while retaining the unpredictability that made humans so dangerous. The guild expected attacks by fleets and armies, not infiltration by a single operative who could pass undetected among their own ranks. The sensor package Marcus was installing contained several modifications of his own design. Quantum resonance disruptors that would interfere with the station's artificial gravity. Neural scramblers calibrated to the brain frequencies of a dozen different species. Most importantly, a virus that would corrupt the station's AI and turn its defensive systems against the guild operatives. As he worked, Marcus monitored the communications traffic between arriving shuttles and the station's control center. The guild leaders were discussing their greatest triumph, the elimination of the human threat that had worried them for so many years. They spoke of divided territories and new contracts of expanding their operations into sectors that humans could no longer protect. They had no idea that their greatest triumph was about to become their final mistake. Marcus finished installing the sensor package and made his way to one of the station's maintenance airlocks. The facility was massive, designed to accommodate thousands of beings from across the galaxy. Miles of corridors connected meeting halls, private quarters, entertainment districts, and secure communication centers. All of it monitored by AI systems that could track every movement and identify every individual aboard. Except for one. The identity theft protocols Marcus had perfected during his campaign against the guild allowed him to move freely through the station's corridors. To the monitoring systems, he appeared as Vexnull, a routine maintenance worker performing standard duties. The real Vexnull's genetic markers and behavioral patterns had been extracted from guild databases and programmed into a biomimetic implant that Marcus wore beneath his artificial skin. The main conference hall was located at the station's center, a vast amphitheater capable of holding thousands of beings. Marcus made his way there through service corridors, observing the guild operatives as they gathered for their historic meeting. He recognized faces from wanted posters and intelligence reports, beings responsible for the deaths of billions across the galaxy. Today, their killing would end. The guild's leadership had arranged themselves according to strict hierarchical protocols. The most powerful syndicate lords occupied the central platforms, while lesser operatives filled the surrounding tiers. At the very center sat the conclave's three primary leaders: Krexhar the Deathbringer, a Zephyrian whose organization controlled assassination operations across the core worlds; Matriarch Velnara, a Vorthak whose offspring serve as enforcers throughout the Outer Rim; and High Assassin Torgash, a Kethvari who had personally killed more sentients than entire armies. Marcus positioned himself in a maintenance alcove overlooking the main floor, where he could observe the proceedings while remaining undetected. The assassins were discussing the division of former human territories, arguing over who would control the most profitable sectors. Their casual dismissal of an entire species' extinction filled Marcus with cold rage, but he forced himself to remain patient. He would have justice for his people, but only if he executed his plan perfectly. The first phase began when the station's artificial gravity fluctuated slightly, a minor anomaly that the guild operatives attributed to the facility's ancient construction. In reality, the quantum resonance disruptors Marcus had installed were beginning their work, subtly destabilizing the gravitic fields that kept beings anchored to the station's decks. The second phase, activated as High Assassin Torgash began his speech about humanity's final elimination. The neural scramblers Marcus had positioned throughout the station started broadcasting subsonic frequencies that would gradually impair the cognitive functions of specific species. The effects would be subtle at first, barely noticeable until they became fatal. The third phase was Marcus himself. He dropped from the maintenance alcove into the conference hall, landing silently behind a group of minor guild operatives. The molecular disruptor he'd taken from the training facility hummed with barely contained energy as he began his systematic elimination of the galaxy's most dangerous killers. The first dozen deaths were attributed to equipment malfunctions and industrial accidents. Bodies simply disappeared, leaving no trace except confused witnesses who couldn't explain what they'd seen. The neural scramblers were affecting the survivors' perception, making them question their own senses as their colleagues vanished around them. When the assassins finally realized they were under attack, Marcus was already moving among them like a force of nature. The personal cloaking device rendered him invisible to conventional sensors, while the biomimetic implant convinced the station's security systems that he was authorized to be anywhere he chose to go. Defensive positions, Krexhar shouted as energy weapons began firing wildly throughout the conference hall. Identify and eliminate the intruder. But there was nothing to identify. Marcus appeared and disappeared at will, striking from impossible angles before vanishing again into the chaos he'd created. The guild operatives, trained to hunt prey that ran or hid, found themselves facing an adversary who fought like they did, while possessing capabilities they couldn't understand. The station's defensive systems activated as the virus Marcus had introduced spread through the facility's computer network. Automated turrets began firing on guild operatives, blast doors sealed randomly to trap groups of assassins in confined spaces, and the artificial intelligence announced that a contamination protocol was in effect. "This is impossible," Matriarch Velnara hissed as her bodyguards formed a protective circle around her. No single being could infiltrate this facility and survive long enough to cause this level of damage. Marcus materialized directly in front of her, the molecular disruptor's barrel pressed against what passed for her forehead. "Hello, Matriarch. I believe you have a contract on my species." Velnara's multiple eyes widened as she recognized what she was seeing. "Human, but you're extinct. We eliminated all of your colonies, all of your ships, all trace of your kind." "You missed one," Marcus said quietly, "and one was enough." The molecular disruptor fired, reducing the matriarch to her component atoms. Her bodyguards opened fire immediately, but Marcus was already gone, moving through the panicking crowd as he hunted the conclave's remaining leadership. Krexhar had barricaded himself behind overturned furniture with a squad of elite Zephyrian assassins. They'd created a defensive perimeter using energy shields and automated weapons, turning their position into a fortress that could withstand a direct assault by military forces. Marcus didn't assault it directly. Instead, he accessed the station's environmental controls and began flooding the conference hall with a gaseous compound he'd synthesized from materials found in guild laboratories. The gas was harmless to most species, but it reacted violently with Zephyrian biology, causing respiratory failure and neural paralysis. Within minutes, Krexhar's defenders were convulsing on the deck, their natural immunity to most poisons useless against a weapon specifically designed to exploit their physiological weaknesses. Marcus walked calmly through their dying bodies and stood before the Deathbringer himself. "You killed 17 innocent colonists on a mining station in the Tau Ceti system," Marcus said, checking the molecular disruptor's power levels. "Men, women, and children who had never hurt anyone. I want you to think about them as you die." Krexhar tried to speak, but the gas had paralyzed his vocal cords. His eyes conveyed the terror and understanding that Marcus had seen in so many of his enemies. The realization that they had created something worse than themselves, something that would hunt them with the same methodical precision they'd once used against their own prey. The molecular disruptor fired for the last time, and the Deathbringer joined his victims in atomic dissolution. High Assassin Torgash had retreated to the station's communications center, where he was desperately trying to contact Guild headquarters and warn them about the threat they were facing. The Kethvari moved with the fluid grace of his species as he worked the communication console, his adaptive camouflage making him nearly invisible against the metallic walls. Nearly, but not completely. Marcus entered the communication center as Torgash completed his transmission to the Guild's leadership. The High Assassin spun around as he detected movement, his hood expanding to reveal sensor arrays that analyzed Marcus from multiple angles simultaneously. "The Shadow Walker," Torgash hissed. "We should have known. The attacks, the systematic destruction of our facilities, it was all leading to this." Marcus nodded, drawing an energy blade he'd taken from one of the matriarch's bodyguards. "Your people made a choice when they decided to exterminate my species. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." The Kethvari struck with lightning speed, his claws extending as he lunged across the communication center. But Marcus had fought dozens of his kind, learning their attack patterns and exploiting their predictable responses to threats. He sidestepped the High Assassin's charge and brought the energy blade down in a perfect arc, severing Torgash's head from his serpentine body. The station shuddered as its power systems began failing, overloaded by the virus Marcus had introduced into the computer network. Throughout the facility, automated systems were turning against the Guild operatives, hunting them through corridors that had become death traps. Marcus made his way to the station's central computer core, where he uploaded a final message to the Guild's communication network. This time, instead of speaking into a recording device, he patched directly into their databases and planted the message where it would be impossible to delete or ignore. "The Conclave of Shadows is dead." His voice echoed through every Guild facility in the galaxy. 237 of your leaders died today because they thought they could exterminate humanity without consequences. They were wrong. Marcus paused, accessing the Guild's membership databases and contract listings. "I have your names. I have your locations. I have your fears. And I'm coming for all of you." The message continued with a list of every Guild operative in the galaxy, their current locations, and the specific crimes they'd committed against human colonies. It was a death warrant delivered to an entire organization, served by the last member of the species they tried to destroy. As alarms wailed throughout the station and emergency systems struggled to contain the spreading chaos, Marcus made his way to the docking bay where the Crimson Talon waited. The Guild shuttles were still docked, their crews dead or trapped elsewhere in the facility. Soon they would join the expanding debris field that had once been the galaxy's most secure meeting place. Marcus strapped himself into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence. As the cruiser cleared the station's docking bay, he activated the quantum resonance disruptors one final time. The massive facility tore itself apart as its gravitic systems failed catastrophically, creating a localized space-time distortion that consumed everything within 1,000,000 kilometers. The Conclave of Shadows was gone, erased from existence along with the beings who had attended it. But more importantly, the Guild's organizational structure had been decapitated in a single stroke. Without their leadership, the remaining operatives would turn on each other, fighting for control of territories and contracts while Marcus hunted them systematically. As the Crimson Talon entered hyperspace, Marcus reviewed the intelligence he'd gathered during the conclave. The guild had fractured into dozens of competing factions, each claiming authority over different aspects of their operations. They would be vulnerable now, isolated and suspicious of each other while dealing with the growing legend of the Shadow Walker, who had single-handedly destroyed their most powerful leaders. But Marcus knew his work wasn't finished. The guild was wounded, not dead, and wounded predators were often the most dangerous. He would need to move quickly to prevent them from reorganizing, striking at their remaining strongholds before they could adapt to his tactics. More importantly, he had learned something troubling during his infiltration of the station. The guild wasn't acting independently in their war against humanity. Someone else had placed the original contracts, someone with the resources and influence to convince the galaxy's assassins to commit genocide. Marcus pulled up the star charts and began plotting his next course. The contract had originated from the Zephyrian Empire's core worlds, specifically from a facility that didn't officially exist. Finding the truth behind humanity's extinction would require infiltrating the heart of an interstellar empire that had remained hidden in the shadows while others did their killing. It would be the most dangerous mission of his war against the galaxy's assassins. It would also be the most important, because somewhere in the Zephyrian Empire's secret facilities, someone was already planning humanity's replacement, a new species that would serve their interests better than humans ever had. Marcus set course for Zephyrian space and activated the ship's stealth systems. The guild's war against humanity was nearly over, but the real war was just beginning. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. #Empire of Ashes, the Zephyrian Imperial Core, was a fortress system containing 7 worlds, each more heavily defended than most species' entire territories. At its heart lay Zephyr Prime, a planet-sized artificial construct that served as the seat of an empire spanning half the galaxy. No unauthorized vessel had ever penetrated its defenses and returned to tell of what lay within. Marcus Kane was about to change that. The stolen Imperial courier ship dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, its credentials perfectly forged using codes extracted from the guild's database. To the automated defense platforms, it appeared as the Swift Retribution, returning from a routine diplomatic mission to the outer colonies. The ship's AI had been completely reprogrammed to think like Marcus, allowing it to respond to security challenges with the casual arrogance expected from Imperial vessels. Swift Retribution, you're cleared for approach Vector 12, came a transmission from System Control. Proceed to Zephyr Prime and prepare for standard inspection protocols. Marcus acknowledged the transmission while reviewing the intelligence he'd gathered during his campaign against the guild. The assassination contracts hadn't been placed by the Empire's official government, but by something called the Continuity Directorate, a shadow organization that operated from deep within the Imperial bureaucracy. They were the beings responsible for humanity's extinction, and they were planning something that would make genocide look like a minor administrative decision. The approach to Zephyr Prime took 6 hours, giving Marcus time to study the system's defenses and prepare for what would likely be his final mission. Orbital weapons platforms capable of destroying moons tracked his passage, while patrol fleets larger than most nations' entire navies maintained constant vigilance. The Empire had ruled for 3,000 years by making resistance seem impossible, but they'd never faced a human with nothing left to lose. Marcus docked at a civilian commerce station orbiting Zephyr Prime, where his forged credentials identified him as a mid-level bureaucrat returning from a fact-finding mission. The identity belonged to a real Zephyrian named Velkar Thane, a functionary in the Imperial Census Bureau who had convenient access to restricted databases. The real Thane was currently dissolving in molecular form somewhere in the void, courtesy of Marcus's molecular disruptor. Zephyr Prime's surface was a cityscape that stretched from pole to pole, billions of structures reaching toward the sky in perfect geometric harmony. At the planet's center stood the Spire of Eternity, a tower so tall it disappeared into the upper atmosphere. Somewhere within that structure was the Continuity Directorate, and somewhere within the Directorate were the beings responsible for ordering humanity's extinction. Marcus took a transit pod to the planet's surface, joining the endless streams of beings who moved through the Imperial capital on official business. Zephyrians, Kethvari, Vorthak, and dozens of other species all working together to maintain the empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. They moved with the confidence of beings who serve the ultimate authority, unaware that their perfect order was about to be shattered by a single human carrying stolen weapons and borrowed identities. The Spire of Eternity was protected by security measures that made guild installations look primitive by comparison. Energy shields, automated defenses, psychic barriers, and scanning systems that could analyze a being down to the molecular level. Thousands of guards from a dozen different species maintained constant watch, while AI systems monitored every movement and conversation within the structure. Marcus walked through the main entrance using Velkar Thane's credentials, his biomimetic implants convincing the security scanners that he was exactly who he appeared to be. The molecular disruptor and other weapons he carried were disguised as standard bureaucratic equipment, invisible to systems designed to detect conventional threats. The Continuity Directorate occupied the upper levels of the spire, accessible only to beings with the highest security clearances. Marcus rode a transit tube to the 97th floor, where he presented his forged authorization to a Kethvari security chief named SSS Thinner. The Serpentine alien examined the credentials with professional thoroughness before waving Marcus through the checkpoint. "The director will see you in conference room 7, Thinner hissed. "Please proceed directly there and wait for further instructions." Marcus nodded respectfully and made his way through corridors lined with holographic displays showing the Empire's territorial boundaries. Star maps that depicted thousands of systems, billions of worlds, trillions of beings all united under Zephyrian rule. It was an empire built on the assumption that resistance was futile and rebellion impossible. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Conference Room 7 was a crystalline chamber that offered spectacular views of the capital city below. 3 beings waited inside, each representing a different aspect of the Continuity Directorate's authority. Director Korthax was an ancient Zephyrian whose cybernetic enhancements allowed him to interface directly with the Empire's computer networks. Administrator Velthanes managed the Directorate's vast bureaucracy, coordinating policies across thousands of worlds. Most interesting was the third figure, a being whose species Marcus didn't recognize, wearing robes that seemed to absorb light itself. "Velkar Thane," Director Korthax said without looking up from his holographic displays. "Your report on the human extermination protocols. We trust everything proceeded according to specifications." Marcus sat at the conference table and accessed the briefing materials he'd stolen from the guild databases. "The assassination contracts were completed successfully," he said, using Velkar's vocal patterns and mannerisms. "All human colonies, outposts, and vessels have been eliminated." Administrator Velthanes nodded approvingly. "Excellent. The human expansion was becoming problematic for our long-term objectives. Their breeding rate and technological adaptability would have made them uncontrollable within another century." The robed figure spoke for the first time, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The specimens we collected before the extermination will provide sufficient genetic material for our purposes. The human cognitive patterns show promise for our next generation of servitor species." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as the implications became clear. The Zephyrians hadn't just exterminated humanity out of fear or prejudice. They'd been harvesting human genetic material to create a new slave species, beings with human intelligence and adaptability, but without human independence and unpredictability. "How many specimens were preserved?" Marcus asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Director Korthax manipulated his holographic interface, calling up files that made Marcus's hands clench in a fist beneath the conference table. 317 live subjects, taken from various colonies before the sterilization protocols were implemented. Their neural patterns are being analyzed to determine optimal modifications for our breeding program. The conference room's walls displayed images that made Marcus want to scream with rage. Human children, women, men, all held in cryogenic suspension while Zephyrian scientists studied their brains and genetic structures. His people hadn't just been murdered. They'd been reduced to laboratory specimens, raw material for the Empire's next experiment in creating perfect servants. "The initial modifications have been promising," Administrator Velthanes continued. "Increased docility, reduced independence, enhanced physical capabilities. We should have the first generation of neo-humans ready for deployment within 5 years. Marcus stood slowly, his hand moving to the concealed molecular disruptor. And what happens to the specimens once you've extracted what you need? The robed figure turned toward him, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been a face beneath the light-absorbing fabric. They will be terminated, of course. The originals are too unpredictable for our purposes. We require only the refined characteristics. I see, Marcus said quietly. And where are these specimens being held? Director Korthax gestured toward his holographic display. Sublevel 47, Laboratory Complex Omega. The most secure facility in the Empire, protected by measures that could withstand. The molecular disruptor fired 3 times in rapid succession. Director Korthax, Administrator Velthanes, and the robed figure all dissolved into their component atoms, leaving only empty chairs and the echo of their final words hanging in the crystalline chamber. Marcus accessed the conference room's computer terminal, using Director Korthax's neural interface to penetrate the Continuity Directorate's most classified databases. What he found there made him understand the true scope of the Empire's crimes. Humanity wasn't their first victim. Over the past 3 millennia, they'd systematically exterminated dozens of species whose characteristics they found useful, preserving genetic samples while eliminating the originals. The Kethvari had been their first success story. Originally an independent species with remarkable adaptive camouflage abilities, they'd been reduced to laboratory subjects and rebuilt as loyal servants. The Vorthak pack-hunting instincts came from another extinct species that had resisted Imperial expansion. Even the Guild itself was an Imperial creation, a weapon designed to eliminate threats while maintaining plausible deniability. But the files also revealed something else. The 317 human specimens weren't the only survivors. Hidden throughout the galaxy were small groups of humans who had escaped the initial extermination, refugees who had gone deep underground to avoid the Guild hunters. The Empire didn't know about them yet, but their surveillance networks were expanding, and it was only a matter of time before the survivors were discovered. Marcus downloaded the complete files and prepared to leave the Spire. But first, he had a promise to keep to the 17 colonists who died on the mining station, to the families murdered on distant worlds, to his entire species whose only crime had been existing in a galaxy ruled by beings who saw other life forms as raw materials for their experiments. He made his way to sub-level 47 through maintenance shafts and service corridors, avoiding the security systems that were beginning to respond to the deaths in Conference Room 7. The Spire was massive, containing thousands of levels and millions of inhabitants, but its very size worked in Marcus's favor. In a structure so vast, 3 missing administrators were just statistical anomalies until someone thought to investigate. Laboratory Complex Omega was exactly what the Zephyrians had promised. The most secure facility in the Empire. Energy shields, automated defenses, atmospheric locks, and scanning systems that could detect a single molecule of foreign material. But the security was designed to keep intruders out, not to prevent someone with legitimate access from moving freely within the complex. Marcus used the stolen authorization codes to enter the facility's central monitoring station, where he found a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Row upon row of cryogenic chambers, each containing a human being held in suspended animation. Men, women, children, all of them unconscious and unaware of what had happened to their species while they slept. The youngest victim was a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The oldest was a man whose gray hair suggested he'd lived long enough to see his grandchildren born. All of them taken from their homes and families, reduced to specimens in an alien laboratory, while their species was systematically exterminated. Marcus accessed the facility's computer systems and began the revival procedures for all 317 chambers simultaneously. It would take hours for the subjects to fully awaken, but he could accelerate the process using protocols stolen from Zephyrian medical databases. His people would live again, even if only long enough to see their species' final revenge against the empire that had destroyed them. As the revival procedures began, Marcus planted explosive charges throughout the laboratory complex. Not enough to kill the awakening humans, but sufficient to destroy the genetic samples and research data that the Zephyrians had spent years collecting. The Empire's neo-human project would end today, along with their 3,000-year reign of terror. The first human to fully awaken was a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chun, whose personnel file identified her as a terraforming engineer from the Kepler 442 colony. She opened her eyes slowly, consciousness returning as the cryogenic drugs faded from her system. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from months of suspension. Marcus knelt beside her chamber, removing his biomimetic disguise to reveal his human features. "You're safe," he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "I'm Marcus Kane. I'm here to take you home." Sarah's eyes widened as she saw his face, recognizing something she'd thought was lost forever. "Human. You're human. But the colonies, the guild, they said everyone was dead." "They lied," Marcus said simply. "There are others, hidden throughout the galaxy, waiting for a signal that it's safe to come out of hiding. Today, we give them that signal." As more humans began awakening throughout the complex, Marcus accessed the Spire's communication systems and prepared to broadcast his final message to the galaxy. Not just to the guild's remaining operatives, but to every species that had ever served the Empire, every being that had accepted Zephyrian rule as inevitable and eternal. "Citizens of the galaxy," his voice echoed through every Imperial communication network, reaching billions of beings across thousands of worlds. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire has ruled through fear and deception. They've told you that resistance is futile, that their authority is absolute, that other species exist only to serve their purposes. Marcus paused, looking at the awakening humans around him. "They lied. My name is Marcus Kane, and I'm the last free human in the galaxy. For the past year, I have waged war against the Empire's agents, destroying their assassins and exposing their crimes. Today, I stand in the heart of their power, surrounded by the evidence of their greatest atrocity." The transmission continued with detailed evidence of the Empire's genocide programs, their systematic extermination of dozens of species, their plan to create servitor races from the genetic material of their victims. Information that would shatter the illusion of imperial benevolence and reveal the true nature of their 3,000-year reign. But Marcus saved the most important revelation for last. The Empire is not invincible. Their leaders are not gods. They are beings like any others, capable of fear, capable of defeat, capable of death. And today they learn